Welcome to Get Organized at Work. I'm your host, Kayla Fahey-Ahrndt, healthcare leader, mom of three, and your go-to guide for ditching the chaos and taking control of your workday. This is the show where we turn overwhelming to-do lists into clear, actionable plans so you can crush your goals and show up as your best self at work and in your life. Whether you're here for strategies to stay ahead or systems to simplify your workday, you're in the right place. Let's get organized, have some fun, and make this year your best year in your career yet. Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to Get Organized at Work podcast. I'm Kayla. I'm your host. Wow. If you're listening in real time, there's only 2 full weeks left in August, which just blows my mind. I'm happy to be with you. And as I'm recording this, I'm looking outside. The sun is shining, and this morning it was nice and crisp out, which is my favorite weather. So I feel like we're getting in the groove. No worries if you're not listening to this in real time. I hope your day is beautiful. I hope you'll sit down with me for a cup of coffee or tea. Maybe you're beginning your work week, and let's talk about managing systems rather than managing tasks. Have you ever had one of those days where you were incredibly productive and somehow by the end of the day, you still weren't sure you worked on the right things? You were in your email, you crossed things off your list, you responded to all the team's messages and pings, you followed up with people, you sat in 4 or 5 meetings, you remembered something you forgot to do yesterday and quickly took care of that. You were busy all day. Maybe you were even productive all day. But then you finally stop and think, wait, what actually moved forward today? Or maybe your problem isn't that you don't have a task system. Maybe you do. Maybe you have a pretty good one, but you're still pulling action items out of meetings. You're checking email for something you forgot. You're trying to remember what you delegated. You're wondering which project actually needs your attention. You've got notes in different places, and you're not entirely sure you've captured everything coming at you from meetings, chats, and emails. And when everything becomes overwhelming, sometimes you find yourself gravitating toward the things you like doing or the things that are easiest to finish, even when you know they're probably not the most important. And somewhere in the background of your brain is a little nagging thought, oh, I know there's something I'm forgetting. If any of that sounds familiar, here's what I want to talk about today. You may not have a task management problem. You may have a systems problem. Today's episode is really a continuation of the conversation we started last week. Last week, we talked about why high performers still feel disorganized. And one of the biggest ideas from that episode is this: sometimes your leadership simply outgrows the system that got you here. The habits that made you successful earlier in your career aren't necessarily the same habits that will sustain you as your responsibilities become even more complex. Because success creates complexity. And that's a good thing. It means there's more projects, more people, more meetings, more decisions, more information, more things you've delegated, more things you're accountable for, even though you're not personally doing them, more things you simply can't cross off your own list. And eventually, a really good to-do list isn't enough. You've made it to a new level of leadership. Now, here's the problem with managing everything like a task. Think about traditional productivity advice. Make a list, prioritize the list, schedule your tasks, check things off. And listen, I love a good list. I'm absolutely not anti-task list. I love checking something off just as much as anybody else. Tasks do matter. But the more I've studied how leaders actually work, and honestly, the more I've looked at my own work, the more that I realized leadership doesn't neatly fit into a task list. Let's say you're leading a major project. You might have 3 tasks related to a project that day. Send an email, review the document, schedule the meeting. Great. You could finish all 3. Check, check, check. But knowing those tasks doesn't necessarily tell you, is the project on track? What's the next major milestone? What are we waiting for? What's stuck? What's the biggest risk? Who owns the next piece? What decisions need to be made? Where do I need to intervene or change my leadership? Where do I specifically not need to intervene? That's not task management. That's project management. Or maybe you have somebody on your team who needs your support. You could put, quote, follow up with Jenny. Okay, but What you're actually managing isn't a task called follow up with Jenny. You're managing a leadership responsibility. What's happening with Jenny? What did you discuss last time? What support does she need? What did you commit to? What did she commit to? When do you need to check back? Is there something you need to coach? Is there something you need to delegate? Is there something you actually need to let go of? That's not just a task either. It's leadership management. And then there are your goals. You could put work on strategic plan, which sounds lovely, but we all know what happens to a task called work on strategic planning. It sits there and it sits there because email is happening, meetings are happening, people need things, projects are moving, something urgent comes up. And suddenly you've gone another week without actually stepping away from the immediate work long enough to ask, where are we going? What's changing? What deserves more attention? What should we stop doing? What am I saying that I wasn't seeing 3 months ago? That's not a task either. That's a strategic planning system. And this is where I think a lot of really capable people get stuck. We keep trying to solve increasingly complex work with increasingly sophisticated to-do lists. But eventually, the list isn't the problem. The architecture underneath your work is. Your work isn't one system. This realization has completely changed the way I've been thinking about organization. Your work isn't one ginormous system. It's made up of interconnected systems, multiple. And I've been developing something that I call the leadership operating system. Within that operating system, I think about 5 core systems. The first is information management. Where does your information live? Your notes, decisions, your reference material, the meeting documentation, the information you know you're going to need 3 months from now. Can you find what you need when you need it? Or are you searching email, Teams, OneNote, folders, old meeting invitations, your notebook, and your memory? The second is project management. Can you see the work that's moving? What's on track? What's stuck? What's waiting? What needs your intervention? What doesn't? The third is task management. Yes, tasks still matter. What specifically do you need to do? What is most important? What needs to happen today, this week, later? And do you actually trust the things that you need to do are captured somewhere? Then there's leadership management. And this is one I think traditional productivity systems often just miss completely. Who and what needs your leadership action? What decisions are sitting with you? What have you delegated? What conversations need to happen? Who needs support? Where do you add value? What can you let go of? What can wait? And finally, there's strategic planning. Are you creating enough space to stop reacting to what's immediately in front of you and actually decide where you're going? Are you reviewing your goals? Are you thinking ahead? Are you noticing what's changing? Or does strategy happen only when everything else finally feels quiet? Because if that's the plan, strategy probably isn't happening very often. And here's one really important part. These 5 systems aren't independent. They're connected. Your information systems feed into your task system. Your task system connects to your projects. Your projects influence where your leadership attention belongs. And your leadership responsibilities influence your priorities. And you need enough visibility across all of them to step back and think strategically, which means when those systems aren't connected, something else has to connect them. And usually that something is you. When systems aren't connected, you actually become the integration layer. This might be my favorite way to explain this whole concept. Imagine you leave a meeting. You took notes in OneNote. There's a task buried in those notes. There's also a decision that affects a project. Someone else agreed to do something by Friday. And the conversation surfaced a bigger idea you want to come back to strategically next month. Now imagine none of those systems are connected. Well, what happens? You become the integration layer. You have to remember, oh yeah, I need to pull out that task from my notes. I should update the project. I need to remember that Jason owes me something Friday. I should probably follow up with him if I don't hear anything. And I really want to come back to that bigger idea when I have time. And now your brain is quietly keeping all of those loops or tabs open. And because you're very capable, you can often make that work for a surprisingly long time. We're pretty good at it. You remember the conversation, you remember the email, you remember the thing you delegated, you remember which project is starting to get shaky, you remember that you promised somebody you'd circle back with them, you remember that thing you wanted to think about strategically. You keep connecting the dots. And eventually you start saying things like, oh, I just need to stay on top of everything. And I want you to challenge that sentence because you shouldn't have to personally stay on top of everything. Your systems should help you stay on top of everything. There's a huge difference. Because if your entire operating model depends on you remembering what happens next, you haven't built a system. You've become the system. And no wonder you're exhausted. You might be thinking, okay, yeah, I'm tired. Well, what can I do about it, Kayla? Let's talk about it. This is the shift I want you to start thinking about. Instead of asking, how do I remember more? Shift to ask, how do I build a system so I don't have to remember this? Instead of, how do I check my projects more often? You can ask, how do I create enough visibility that I know which projects actually need my attention? Instead of, how do I keep thinking about everything I've delegated so nothing gets dropped? You can ask, where does delegated work live so I can release it until it's time to follow up? Instead of, how do I squeeze strategic thinking onto my task list? Ask, what rhythm protects strategic thinking before my week fills up? That's what systems do. They reduce the amount of work your brain has to do to simply keep the work visible. And that frees up your brain for something much more important: thinking, deciding, leading, problem solving, creating, noticing things, connecting the dots, seeing what's coming, actually enjoying your day. Those are the things I actually want my brain doing. I don't want to use my best cognitive energy remembering what somebody owes me on a spreadsheet by Thursday. All right, so what does this actually look like? Here's a really simple example. Let's say you have a task on your list. Review project X. That's task management. But let's zoom out. What if instead you have a weekly project review system? Once a week, you intentionally look across all your active projects. And for each one, you ask, where does this stand? What's the next milestone? What's moving? What's stuck? What am I waiting for? What needs me? What doesn't need me? Suddenly, you're not relying on Project X becoming loud enough to remind you it exists. Your system surfaces it, and that's the difference. Tasks tell you what to do. Systems help you know what deserves your attention. And I think that becomes a much more important skill as your leadership grows. Because think about what happens when you don't have visibility. Whatever becomes loudest wins. An email comes in, someone sends you a Teams message, someone walks in your office, a project suddenly becomes urgent. You remember something while you were driving home, and now you're responding to whatever most recently entered your field of vision. That's not necessarily because you're bad at prioritizing. Sometimes it's because your system isn't giving you anything better to prioritize from. If I can't see my projects, if I can't see my priorities, if I can't see what I've delegated, if I can't see where my leadership attention belongs, then of course urgency is going to win because urgency is visible. Your strategic priorities often aren't. And that's why I don't think the answer simply is be more disciplined or manage your time better or try this new productivity hack. The answer is to make the important work more visible because not everything is worth your intention. All right. And sometimes I think people hear the word system and they immediately imagine something incredibly complicated. I need 14 million dashboards and I need automations and I need elaborate project management software. I need to spend my entire weekend rebuilding OneNote. No, please don't do that. A system can be incredibly simple. A system is simply a repeatable way that something happens, a ritual. Where do meeting notes go? That's a system. How do tasks get captured from email? That's a system. When do you review your projects? That's a system. How do you know what you've delegated? That's a system. When do you look at your goals? That's a system. How do you decide what deserves your attention this week? That's a system. And the beauty of that is that you probably already have pieces of your leadership operating system together. The question isn't, do I have systems? You do. The question is, are those systems intentionally designed to work together? And do I trust them? Because that's the goal, not perfection, trust. All right, I don't know about you, but I'm like, okay, I'm energized to do something about this week. Here's what I want you to do. Don't rebuild your entire productivity system. Seriously, don't. Don't listen to this episode and download all the new apps and reorganize OneNote and create, all the dashboards and abandon it all 3 weeks from now. Instead, I want you to notice friction this week. Every time you find yourself thinking, where did I put that? What was I supposed to do? Didn't I delegate that? What is happening with that project? Who am I supposed to follow up with? What should I actually be working on right now? When am I ever going to have time to think about this? I want you to pause and ask, what system is actually failing me here? If you can't find something, that might be an information management problem. If you're constantly surprised by project statuses, that might be a project management problem. If you're forgetting commitments or don't know what to work on next, that might be a task management problem. If you're mentally tracking everything you've delegated or constantly wondering who needs you, that might be a leadership management problem. And if you keep saying, I really need time to step back and think, but that time never comes, that may be a strategic planning problem. So instead of immediately fixing the individual thing in front of you, just start to get curious about the system underneath it, because that's where the leverage is. All right, and I want to make something really clear. I'm not trying to create some perfect productivity machine where every minute of your day is optimized and every part of your life lives inside a beautifully color-coded dashboard. Absolutely not. Your system should support your leadership. Your leadership should not exist to maintain your system. A good operating system should actually make work feel lighter. It should help you see, decide, help you release things. It should tell you this matters, but this doesn't. This needs me. This can wait. This belongs to someone else. This is moving. This is stuck. And this is where I need to spend my attention next. Because ultimately, that's what I think organization at this level is really about. It's not having the prettiest planner. It's not having inbox zero, not checking every box on your to-do list. It's actually about creating enough clarity, visibility, and trust that you can lead intentionally. So if your responsibilities have gotten bigger, if your work has become more complex, and your answer has been to make longer lists, check more places, remember more things, and work harder to stay on top of it, maybe you don't need to get better at carrying all of it. Maybe your leadership has simply outgrown the infrastructure supporting it. And maybe the next question isn't, how can I get more done? Maybe it's, what systems would make this easier to lead? That's the question I want you to think about this week. Because tasks will always keep coming. There will always be another email, meeting, project, or request, another thing you could do. The goal isn't to finally finish it all. The goal is to build a way of operating that helps you consistently know what matters, where it stands, what needs you, and what can wait. All right, and I want to give you a roadmap of where we're going. We're going to keep building on these ideas. Because if I'm telling you to stop managing everything as a collection of tasks, there's an obvious next question. Okay, Kayla, then what exactly am I supposed to be looking at to manage my work? And that's exactly what we're talking about next week. Next week's episode is about the one leadership dashboard every manager needs. We're going to talk about what I mean when I say leadership dashboard, what belongs on one and what doesn't, and how having the right information visible can help you stop reacting to whatever happens to be the loudest. Because you don't need to see everything all the time, but you do need to see the right things at the right time. And I can't wait to get into that with you next week. I've also been building something behind the scenes that I'm really excited about. If this conversation about moving from managing tasks to managing systems is hitting home for you, I'm going to be teaching a free live workshop on September 29th called Build Your Leadership Operating System. We're still several weeks away, but I've opened registration early because I know some of you are going to want to go deeper into exactly what we've been talking about here. Also, I'm going to be on vacation in September. So it's like, I'm just starting early to get this out there. We're going to look at why successful leaders can become increasingly reactive as complexity grows, the core systems behind the way you lead, and how you can begin to build a leadership operating system you can actually trust. So if you're thinking, yes, this is exactly what I need, you can save your seat now. I'll put the registration link in the show notes. And between now and then, we're going to keep unpacking these ideas right here on the podcast. We're going to talk about your leadership dashboard. We're going to talk about the hidden cost of keeping everything in your head. We're going to talk about information management. And we're going to talk about why great leaders get stuck in reaction mode. And eventually, we're going to pull all of those things together because I don't think you need another productivity hack. I think you need the infrastructure capable of supporting the leader that you've become. So this week, notice the friction. Ask yourself, what system is underneath the problem? And if you're curious to find out how you would score on your leadership operating system audit today before the workshop, that's also in the link in my show notes. You can go ahead and take the audit for free. It's going to give you a score and tell you what your biggest areas to work on are. So you can sort of pay attention to those over the next few weeks. All right, I'll meet you back here next week to start building the visibility layer. Until then, stop carrying one system, start operating from one. All right, I will see you next week. Take care.